This is everything you might do wrong in a day in Minecraft. So if any of these describe you, don't worry, that's why we're here. And we'll make the first change, starting with, stop worrying about getting a netherite sword, since the truth is that if you were to get yourself just 3 cobblestone and 2 sticks, you can actually deal more damage. In fact, if you give them both of them sharpness 5, the stone axe will do 12 hit points per hit, whereas the netherite sword only deals 11. And while I'm not saying that an enchanting table's cheap, I will say it's a lot cheaper than a netherite sword, especially one that's also enchanted. So as long as you keep your distance from mobs and attack when your cooldown's gone down, I think you'll find this will be plenty well for you, especially on a game. Never type out this command, but instead you should just hold down the F3 key and then use the F4 to scroll through. With this simple shortcut, we don't have to waste the time typing out the command, and we can seamlessly switch between the different game modes that you might be doing while you're building a map. And if you're a veteran player, it might take a little bit to get used to, but as soon as you do, you'll never want to go back in the older versions. This 1 pixel can completely ruin your builds, because as soon as we convert our grass blocks into a path block, then it goes from 16 pixels tall down to 15. And with that 1 pixel gap of visibility, now we have to consider any blocks that they're seeing behind. So in this case, the proper way that we should be doing this is replacing the block that's underneath with the same block that's above it. Otherwise, our build's just gonna look unfinished. And since we went through extra effort to make sure that we even had the path in the first place, I think it's worth following through so that the rest of the build doesn't look unfinished. One of the oldest rules in Minecraft is that you should never dig straight down. But that old rule is really just old hat. Since when you crunch the numbers like Mumbo Jumbo did, you notice that over 64% of the time that you dig straight down, nothing's gonna happen. You're not gonna fall into lava, you're not gonna fall into a cave and break your legs, just nothing. And if you want to increase those odds to even better chances of survival, what you could always do is stand in between 2 blocks like this and then mine down one after the other. So then if you notice that one of the blocks drops down into a ravine or lava, you'll still be standing on the other block. And at that point, if you don't correct your mistake, you deserve to fall into lava. Stop using shears to collect your leaves, but instead you should use a hoe. No joke, because in recent versions, the hoe has gotten a much bigger bump to how you can use it. And while it does cost some extra experience to get the silk touch on your hoe to do this, the trade-off is that you're going to get a much better durability than using some shears. And considering all the other blocks that we can break quickly by using this tool, I think that's more than enough reason to switch out your shears for a new side hoe. Here's why you need honeycomb if you're playing on an SMP. Because if you're like me and you've been playing Minecraft for years, it's easy to forget that now we're able to edit our signs when you right-click them. And whether you're the one accidentally right-clicking it or one of your friends comes by and vandalizes it, we want to prevent both of those. And so in this case, if you take honeycomb and wax the sign, then it's no longer possible for someone to easily go in and edit the text. If you're planning on naming your tools, do not do it after applying any enchanted books. Since it's laid out in this example, every time that you go to name your tool after you've taken it up a couple levels, it's gonna get much more expensive to do. And that'll in turn bring up the entire enchantment cost of the whole tool, which is something we want to avoid entirely. So come up with a name before you do the step 1. Otherwise, you're just wasting experience. Here's my big issue with modern staircases. Because as great as the design is, the issue comes up when you start to actually try to climb it. And with these stairs, you have to jump up every single step to do it. Instead of using, I don't know, stairs, which just let you seamlessly sprint and walk up them. And really, I'm not trying to turn on auto jump just so I can climb up to my 2nd floor. And honestly, it more so feels like this modern solution just created a couple of modern problems. I'd rather stick to the old-fashioned way. This cave looks safe, but it's actually stupid, because this cave is also safe, and it took a lot less torches. See, since the changes in 1.18 to mob spawning, they'll only ever spawn down here in complete darkness, which is a big change from when they used to spawn in light levels up to 7. And honestly, I have a bad habit of doing this too. It just feels safer when there's more light. But if you're low on resources, just know that you can take this easy out, and it's not going to come back to bite you in any way. Let's face it, rails aren't cheap. So instead of spending all of your iron ingots on just getting a couple of these, I think you'll have a much better time if you just take the time to mine some of these when you're down in a mine shaft. That way we can save our iron ingots for where they actually matter. When you're first exploring your Minecraft world, you'll want to keep this one in mind. Since while it's easy to get caught up with the structures of the rarer things that you're searching for, you should also take note to grab every single sapling type that you see. That way, when you have enough of those built up, you'll be able to build yourself a proper tree farm at your base and open up a whole new color palette of wood types that you get to build with. After all, it's pretty lame to be limited to just what's around you. So while you might not want to settle down in a taiga biome, you should grab the spruce saplings just in case. The wood looks nice even if you don't settle down there, and it'll save you from having to go travel thousands of blocks back just to go and find one again. This house might look nice, but it's got a dirty secret. It's dirt. Dirt's the secret. And while it can be easy to fill in some of the gaps with a cheap block like dirt, all it takes is someone looking at the right angle to know that this house is built off of something pretty cheap. And that especially won't do you any favors if a creeper were to explode. So for that matter, Minecraft doesn't need insulation. I'd recommend against having this. Laying out a redstone contraption can be tough work. And nothing kills the pride of putting in all that hard work just to have it be broken because you placed it on a regular ground block. You see, if you're doing your redstone on a naturally occurring block, then it's just going to be a recipe for confusion. So instead, just color code your contraption, which in turn makes the redstone even easier to fix, as now you can just look at one part instead of the whole thing. I don't like building balconies like this in Minecraft, since if you use slabs on top of blocks to keep it safe for players, then they're barely able to see over them. So instead, we can make this look a lot better while also making it shorter at the same point. Using something like a lectern or an anvil and then putting a trapdoor on top, it'll still be safe, and it's a lot smaller of a footprint for you to see over. As iCraftMC shows off, we're able to grab the big hitbox of the ghast and pull it right back down to our level, at which point it does not take very many hits with a sword or axe to kill this thing off. And if you want to make things even easier and quicker, just put the fishing rod inside your offhand, and you can dual wield your way to victory. If your copper looks like this, I can tell you why it's not oxidizing, since the way that it's coated, copper blocks need at least 4 blocks between them to oxidize at max speed. And if you have the blocks placed any closer together, it's going to take much longer, especially if they're touching. So instead, a pattern like this is going to be the quickest way to do it, helping you to build that Statue of Liberty replica and still get it finished within your own lifetime. Plains biomes are boring. Now, don't get me wrong, they're intentionally supposed to be one of the easiest biomes to build on, that's why they're so flat, but it's also pretty limiting to get used to seeing your same build built in the same place. So venturing out of your comfort zone and finding that you can build inside of other biomes is a great way to fall in love with building in Minecraft again. Not only will you have different resources to choose from, but the differences in the world height and in the biome color map for things like grass and leaves will also get you to explore different block colors. Who knows, you might just find a new favorite spot. I am a huge proponent about lighting up your builds, but while it's a good idea to light up, you should never be too obvious about it. What I mean by that is that lighting should be incorporated into your build. For example, glowstone isn't always a looker out in the open, but once you start hiding it behind some shrubbery or some other kind of transparent block, then you can have lighting and you don't have to see it out in the open. Plus, you can play with it to give really cool atmosphere to your builds. It's another skill entirely to be able to hide your lighting well, and it's something that I'd encourage all of you to be mindful of. Here's why your iron farm sucks. Since if you've ever had the issue of building an iron farm on the ground level and then just having a whole bunch of iron golems that are around, you'll know that it both throws off your spawn rates, and now you just got a couple of golems that are lying around, and if you try to kill them, they're gonna kill you. So the easiest solution for this? Just go into the sky. Up there you don't have to spawn proof, and that'll also give you more options for how you flow your items into a storage silo. Stop using one material for your floors, because while it's easy to build yourself a wood floor, an even easier way to make that wood floor look better is just by mixing in a pattern like this. And if we instead mix in stripped logs along with our planks, now it becomes a lot more unique. Or you could do my personal favorite of using blocks like blast furnaces and furnaces for their top texture on the floor. Now you got secret places to stash items, and you got a unique floor design. It's pretty cool if you got the cobblestone. Stop using bubble columns, or rather, stop using these bubble columns. Since while a soul sand bubble column could be incredibly great for getting up fast, using another one with magma blocks could be incredibly slow. And instead, it's gonna be much faster and simpler for your elevators. Just have your player fall into something that breaks their fall, like powdered snow or a water block. That way, we make sure that we have the best amount of speed going both up and down. Instead of using chests, use barrels instead. Since, for one, they're cheaper to craft, they cost you 1 less plank for each recipe, and they're also great for small bases, since even if you have a solid block on top of them, you're still able to open them up. And while we can't double their size like we would a regular chest, it's also important to note that if you get a lot of these, they aren't rendered as entities like the rest of the chests, so they cause a lot less lag if you build yourself a barrel monster instead of a chest monster. There's technically nothing wrong with this door, but when we zoom out, I'm sure you can see the problem. Because while asymmetry can be great for a build in many cases, it's when you start to have something like a 2-block doorway that's built into an odd-numbered wall that definitely feels like a sin. But as long as you remember to count, this is an easy one to fix, so I'm not all that worried about it. Why does this lava look so ugly? Well, the unfortunate problem here is that we didn't use lava source blocks for all of them. And as you can notice, cutting corners here is just gonna make for a mess. Which really is true whether you're using water or lava features, but at least water tends to fill in the gaps if you leave it for long enough. But since lava's renewable through dripstone now, I think there's no reason to leave any of your lava pools looking this bad. So if you're gonna do a job, you gotta do it right. You ever place a carpet in your build and it just feels off? Like it's a little too flat. Instead, do what Blue Nerd lays out and mix in regular wool blocks and the carpet on top of them to look more like folds inside of the carpet blocks. Granted, it looks like a rug you're gonna trip over, but it's better than looking like you just covered up a hidden basement. I like this a lot better. Let's face it, if you have a really cool looking house or base, your friend isn't just gonna want to see the outside. They'll want to pay you a visit too. So just by taking some of your leftover materials and stairs from the roof and using them for things like chairs, bookshelves, maybe a couple tables, even just some plants inside too, all of those really make your home feel like a home instead of an empty box in a block game. And after all, you're gonna be spending a lot of time here. You might as well do yourself a service and make it an enjoyable time to spend. Potions are an underrated part of Minecraft survival. And while it can definitely be a chore to have to brew these up, here's a way to cut back on that. Since by just placing a hopper over top of one of your brewing stands, we can essentially queue up a playlist of all the things that we're going to be adding into our potion. So right after the nether wart finishes, it'll put in your ingredient and then put in the modifier after that, making this cheap and efficient, both adjectives that I like. Your Minecraft windows are boring, but they don't have to be. Since if you were to take those same glass panes that you were already using and dye some of them, then you can get a really unique shading to your builds. And I particularly like mixing together gray stained glass panes into our actual white ones to give it those same kind of streaks that the glass pane has in its actual texture. Nothing adds to the panic of dying in Minecraft quite like seeing this show up on your screen. So to prevent that, even though it might look nice to have your bed decorated like this, you really shouldn't build any blocks that could obstruct you from spawning. If you're playing in older versions such as 1.12 and before, then you really gotta watch out for this sort of change. All it takes is just a bit of glass or a snow golem around your bed to mean that you'll never respawn there again. Now, there's nothing wrong with this building, but rather what it's built on, or lack thereof, because when you start to zoom back, you'll notice that part of the building is hanging off the edge of the terrain, and this just looks really amateurish. I mean, there's a reason why even Tony Stark's mansion had these giant supports keeping it to the Malibu coast. Even if gravity doesn't exist in Minecraft, you at least gotta make it look like it does. And by either adding in supports or just expanding the terrain to cover underneath your build, that'll make the whole thing look way more realistic. Stop using your obsidian for blast chambers. Instead, use waterlogged blocks. Since 1.19 lets us now waterlog our leaves and mangrove roots, that water inside will keep these from exploding. And while this does work with any kind of waterlogged block, I would recommend using leaves instead, since at least that way, the water's self-contained, it's not going to flow out of the block, which could be a problem if you're using something like stairs instead. Here's how you can solve one of the most common building mistakes in Minecraft in just 7 seconds. Instead of building your walls where they look flat, you can instead just offset some of the blocks for the foundation, and now you have a lot more depth to your build. Give your roof an overhang instead of having it end at the wall. And just those simple tricks are all that you need to make your build a lot more interesting off the rip. When you're planning a big build, that's where most of your focus goes to. But as much planning and care as that takes, you should consider putting a fraction of that into the little things around it. And so just by putting in a little bit of effort to add a few bushes, maybe some lights, a pathway, you know, nothing crazy, that'll really be able to tie together your build to its surroundings. Because let's face it doesn't matter how cool of a base that you plan on building, if it doesn't blend well with its environment, then it just looks like you cut and pasted from somewhere else. And I'm usually in favor of stopping your builds from looking like a bad Photoshop job, but maybe that's just me. And for how much cheaper these things are to do, both in time and resources, the returns you get from them are actually pretty high. It's worth looking into. Picture this, you take the time to build your perfect mob farm, get all the spawning rates right, and then you ruin it by adding in a viewing window. Don't get me wrong, it's an honest mistake. I also want to see if it's working properly. But ever since 1.18, even just that little bit of light level that seeps in through the glass can block all of the hostile mobs from spawning. So to fix this problem, you should be using the newer tinted glass instead. That way we turn this worrisome window into the one-way glass that you need to do the trick. Now look, no one likes clutter, but way less people like cleaning up clutter, and I'm one of those. But the sad truth is that organizing your storage in Minecraft is disproportionately useful. Now I know it doesn't sound like the most enticing afternoon, but just being able to find all of your resources could save you from a lot of unnecessary search to try and find the things that you need to craft with. And the good news is that when you have an organization system that you cling to, it's a lot easier to keep in line with it. And that way the next time you go mining, you don't just throw all of your stuff into a chest willy-nilly, but you at least know that the stone blocks are supposed to go in the stone designated chest. One of the best things you can do when building your world is thinking about world building. And so if you think about the historical purpose for why your build is that way, it'll be a lot easier to know what theme you're going for. Like if you happen to build next to the ocean, then maybe having it be more of a fisherman village makes sense. Or if you build up in the sky, then making it more futuristic would fit that better. But the sooner that you figure out that theme, the better it is to stick with it and not try to break outside too much. Your farms are good, but they could be so much better. Since while I get that it technically works to just plant your wheat, bamboo, and carrots in the same way, by just spending a little bit of time to automate them into a proper design, not only will your returns get better, but the time to do that chore will get less and less. And plus, I think there's just something really satisfying to the idea of just having this great of a return out of your crops. Even if it's just a simple automatic farm like this micro farm. And with things like bamboo getting a lot more useful in the 1.20 update, we're gonna need this a lot more regularly, so it's worth increasing if you have the chance. Minecraft is a game made of cubes, but your build shouldn't look like one. So one of the quickest ways that you can level up your builds is by just taking different simple shapes and adding them together. now your house doesn't look like you just used the fill command on it. If you're still mining at Y level 11, here's why you need to change. Since after the ore generation changes in 1.18, you'll now need to go down to Y level -58 to have a much better chance of finding your diamonds. Granted, it's gonna take some time to dig all the way down there, but hey, that's what you're finding the diamonds for anyway, so you can have better durability to then find more diamonds. It seems like a payoff to me. If you're planting sugarcane next to your crops, it doesn't always blend well, but if you mix in podzol next to your farmland, that texture will blend a lot nicer when you're placing it next to the water source. And that way we don't have that ugly dehydrated dirt look, distracting from what could have been a really pretty farm. And in my eyes, I'm glad this fixes that. Minecraft has a lot of iconic debates. Whether that's pronouncing it Herobrine or Herobrine, planting your sugarcane on dirt or sand, and now I've got to ask you, do you build your roof with an odd or even number of blocks? While I won't distinguish between which one's better, I will say that it's good to know which one you plan on doing before you lay out your first block. Because while we personally like connecting it up to an odd number of blocks so that you have a single point to the top of your roof, even numbers can look great as well. And in fact, your roof doesn't even have to be slanted like this in the first place. But if you're gonna do that, you should figure it out before you've placed down the first block. If you want to build a farm for your animals, you should keep this in mind first, since you wouldn't want to move over the animals while the farm was still waiting to be built. These animals do not play along very nice when you don't have the proper things to keep them in place. And unless you're looking to actively try and trap all of them like you're playing a game of Lifesteal, you'd be better off building the place completely and then move them into that finished spot. After all, who wants to live in an unfinished house anyway? I'll book my reservation when the hotel's ready, thanks. Ender chests are great for storing your stuff, but how much stuff you store is something you should consider. Since while you could easily just use the 27 slots that come built in, if you were to fill up each of those slots with a different candy-colored shulker box, then each of those slots gets multiplied by another 27 item slots. Once you go through and name all of these in an anvil, you basically won't need a storage system at home, because now you'll have your entire gear saved up in the cloud, which can be great for when you want to go build something new far away without making constant trips back to the restock farm. When you start to hire villagers into your trade, most of us will go straight to librarians and completely forget about the other ones. Maybe a toolsmith and an armorer here and there, but I think you really shouldn't be ignoring the mason villager. For just the cost of a stone cutter, one of these masons can be incredibly useful, as they'll provide you with different blocks that aren't easy to obtain, such as quartz, bricks, glazed terracotta, and after a few run-ins with a zombie, you can get those down to really crazy cheap prices too. I mean, clay isn't exactly a very fun material to get a bunch of, so just being able to save yourself the step and get 2 of these blocks already made for it, that's worthwhile in my eyes alone. If you're still building your enchantment room like this, you're doing it wrong. Or I should say you're doing it inefficiently, since the truth is that you only need 15 bookshelves on one layer to count for this enchantment. And that also counts the corners of the 5x5 square, which is also surprising. I always thought they needed some kind of line of sight to the enchantment table. But sure enough, even if the enchanted table doesn't see them, these outer edges still count. Picture this, you start building your new base, you collect all the resources to do it, start laying together the frame, finally you're placing the last blocks in the roof, only to realize you don't like any of it. And that's exactly why you shouldn't settle for the first design that you take for the build. The best time to mess up is as early as possible. Experiment, use wool or other cheap blocks that you can use to decorate the different areas of the frame. And then, when you're able to visualize it easier, now you can commit to the build and get something that you're actually satisfied with. On the second floor, we've got a beautiful hot tub, but on the ground floor, you're not gonna like it as much. Since the ugly truth is that only having a 1 block thick floor underneath a water or lava feature means that all we're gonna see from the bottom floor is a bunch of particles dripping down from the ceiling. I'd rather just make the floor too thick and not have to worry about it. Most of us like to just dump all of our resources into a chest and then only look at them when we need to. It's because you're not taking the time to compress your blocks where you can. And it's worth the extra step of just crafting all of your base resources into the blocks. Except for nether wart, that's a mistake that you can't undo. But for your iron, diamonds, redstone, all things like that, it's worth a couple of extra seconds. Plus, that's how you know when you're really rich, when you start counting your riches in blocks instead of ingots. I no longer build with stone bricks, since a common mistake in Minecraft building is that you just get used to using the same block palette that you always use, and in that way, your worlds just feel similar. And when I'm not able to tell the difference between this house or one that I built a few years ago, I feel like it's time to expand outside your comfort zone and start to mix with other block palettes. And so, setting a fun challenge for yourself could be a good way to do this. Like, maybe you don't use any wood blocks inside of your build, or you go to the nether and use exclusively blocks that you can find there. In my survival world, I recently did a challenge where I could only use blocks that I got inside of a 1x1 chunk, and a lot of the blocks that I ended up using were pretty unorthodox. Will I use all of them again? Probably not, but now that I know that I have some good ones, now I at least have something to mix in other than just those same stone bricks. If you've ever wondered why the screenshots on Reddit look so much better than your own, here's the secret. You gotta use a low FOV. Now, don't get me wrong, playing on FOV 30 is a nightmare, but when you use it for a screenshot, it gives you a much better flattening to the image. And then if you max out your render distance, you'll be able to make that shot look so much better. And then immediately turn off those settings because we actually want the game to be playable. It doesn't matter how nice your build is, if it has a 2-block tall ceiling, no one's gonna want to come inside. Let's face it, 2-block tall ceilings are just annoying to get around. And without the ability to easily sprint jump between different places of the build, it's really gonna feel claustrophobic for anyone who comes inside. So if you ask me, 3 blocks tall should be at least the minimum. That way you'll have more room for everything you want to do, which is quite literally gonna be less of a pain in the head. Hiding a door behind a painting has to be the oldest trick in the book. And at this point, these aren't fooling anyone except for the newest of players. So to take this worthless secret entrance and bump it up, all we need are some hitboxes. And if you lay out a trapdoor here or a slab there, these become a lot harder to find, keeping your stuff safe for another day. This is a building sin that even Green's guilty of, since while it's easy to get excited about building up the beautiful front of your building, since after all, that's what most people are gonna see, it's when you neglect the back of the build and leave it unfinished that you start to get into a problem. Now I get it, in survival mode it's easy to run out of materials to finish the job, but if you ask me, if you're only gonna do half of the job anyway, then you should shrink down the scope of the build to half the size and do the whole thing. It's a lot more impressive to have a full job. This small drip leaf is incredibly rare, so you shouldn't waste it. See, small drip leaf is essentially non-renewable since you can only find it within lush caves and from wandering trader trades, meaning that if you were to bone meal a small drip leaf into a big one, you're wasting it, since that same big drip leaf is actually easily farmable through other methods. So even if it doesn't look like it, in the long run, you'll want to hold on to the little guys, especially when you can get all the big ones from a setup like this. XP is a valuable resource to have, so you likely want to get a lot of it. But getting a lot of XP doesn't mean that you need to build yourself an XP farm, since the simple truth is that if you head over to the Nether, there's plenty of XP lying around in the floor. By just mining nether quartz ore, I think you'll find this is one of the most effective ways of gaining XP at a very high rate. And it's a lot safer than having to kill a bunch of mobs. Plus, nether quartz ore generates frequently and in pretty big veins, both of which means that you're gonna get a lot of this stuff too. So while quartz as a crafting ingredient might not be so useful if you're not building a house or redstone, even if you don't keep any of the item itself, I think this is still worth doing in your next playthrough. Glass panes can be a real pain for your build. Now, I get it, it's not exactly appealing to have an empty space on your wall, and no one wants to live in a windowless box, so oftentimes we fill that empty space with glass windows. But at a certain point, it just doesn't look good when you have this many windows. Not to mention the lack of privacy. So instead, you'd be better off limiting the number of windows that you use, and finding different ways that you can decorate those walls instead of just another thin glass. Bone meal and saplings pair together great, but not when you're decorating trees. Since, as you'll notice from the small forest by my house, having a bunch of bone mealed saplings makes for a really samey looking build. And instead, you'd be much better off by chopping down those trees and using the materials to build up some custom ones of your own. That way, you can have much more variety, and you get a set of trees that's worthy being placed next to your beautiful house. Minecart roller coasters are great, but they sure are expensive. And you'll see as much when you try to get this minecart trail out of your mine and up into the surface. That's a lot of blocks going up. But instead, we can do this with a bubble column and a bit of scaffolding. Sure enough, the minecart and the person riding it are counted as an entity, meaning that if we have our roller coaster deposit them into a bubble column like so, both will shoot right up to the top, and then if we have a scaffolding above with a rail on top, we can catch us both and essentially make for the cheapest and quickest minecart elevator. Because trust me, an infinite water source is a lot easier to come by than an infinite gold source. Both possible, but I'd rather stick with the ocean than the Nether. Minecraft's a sandbox game, so it's easy to play around with a lot of different fields. But I'd also venture that I'm not the only one who suffers from starting a bunch of little projects, and then I never go through and actually finish them up like I'm supposed to. And while it could have looked great if I actually finished this project in the first place, leaving a bunch of half-finished, unanswered questions around your build, yeah, then it's not just a to-do list, it's a junkyard. And so let's take a page out of Etho's book, where every now and then you just go through and finish up the little things that you never got around to. They're not as exciting as the big stuff, but if you're able to finish a bunch of them in one go, then that could add up to being a pretty major change to your build. And if you really don't want to finish it, just get rid of it. Trust me, it'll look better than just leaving it half empty. If you've ever built with blocks that have an orientation, you're well aware that they're annoying to replace mid-air. So to fix that, we should mention that it's actually possible to just double-click the left-click and the right-click button at the same time, and as long as you instantly mine the block, you'll be able to change the rotation without placing any support blocks for it, which can be great for correcting your mistakes that you placed on that stairs for the roof, or even just for rotating your bamboo right so that it looks good for the window. And as long as you got the right efficiency tools to do this, it'll save you a lot of time. This redstone works, but there's still a problem with it. And as you'll see, that's because we can, well, well, see it. In a lot of ways, having visible redstone is a recipe for disaster, since not only does this make all your circuitry vulnerable, but I'd also venture that whatever circuitry you got going on here does not blend well with the aesthetic you got around it. So instead, we should treat this like a maintenance closet and tuck all of our important cabling behind closed doors. Besides, if you're building a redstone casino, you're not going to want any of your customers knowing exactly how much you're ripping them off. By this point, we're all plenty familiar with the grass block texture, which means using this in a build can often feel tired, or at the very least, underwhelming. But fortunately, we've got some blocks in recent years to help break up that monotony. Like, why not add a strip of moss to the green in your yard to make it look mowed? Or even just mixing in some green concrete powder here and there can help to texture those paths we've seen hundreds of times before. And believe me, any little bit helps. Look, when you're playing in harder difficulties, then a lot of times spawners seem like more trouble than they're worth. But then the problem becomes after I've gone through all of that, when I want to actually make a farm, I have to go find a new spawner. Even though in the moment it might be a hassle to go in and deactivate one of these spawners on the spot, the EXP and items that you're going to get after the fact definitely make up for it. So in the future, let's just try to think about the long term and maybe use torches for these going forward. This crafting recipe works, but it's inefficient, since the truth is that if we make our mossy cobblestone using the new moss blocks instead of vines, it still works just the same, but moss blocks are so much easier to farm, considering they can be harvested through automatic means. If you're building a giant doorway, don't just settle for a regular door block. It just doesn't work well with the scale at all. Instead, finding other solutions to keep mobs out could be a lot more beneficial. Whether that's string under carpets, trapdoors, or even rails, there's plenty of ways to keep mobs at bay without having to use the most basic. And that also means you don't have to get an engineering degree in redstone to figure out how to make something of this scale, both of which I like. Normally when I start up a new world, I'm mining 11 pieces of cobblestone, 3 for my pickaxe and 8 for a furnace, which is a nice exercise in mental math, but that's about all it's good for. Since really when you can, you should be using things like campfires instead of furnaces. Now granted, they cook things much slower than a furnace, but they can also smelt up an infinite amount of food without having to refuel. And not to mention that if you break the campfire, you'll get all the 3 logs that you put into it back as charcoal. So even if you don't use it, you essentially found a faster way to get charcoal than having to smelt it, which could be great for things like torches or putting it in the furnace when you have ore to smelt. That way you'll be using it when it's most useful. This big build will be my life's work, if I live long enough to finish it. It's easy to get overzealous and then completely overcommit on what you're gonna build and now have no time or resources to finish it. So if you want to prevent that, then you should take this old adage that comes from game development. Picture your ideal base, then cut that in half, and then again cut that scale in half, and now you got something that's manageable. That way you're able to put more time into the actual things that people will get to see. Like, scale is impressive, but having details where I can actually see them, that's a lot more manageable. Stop using world edit in your Minecraft builds, or at least stop using it like this. One of the easiest things to forget about is that it copies relative to where you are. So if you type in the copy command and you're standing at this corner, hitting paste will give you some experimental architecture. So if you want to have it paste where you're going to be standing right at the doorway, then you should type in the copy command where you're also standing at that doorway. But at least World Edit has an undo feature for those of us who are just using vanilla commands or are not as lucky. And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?